Wetlands to Waste is the last one of 4 online interactive documentaries made from materials collected by Southeast Chicago residents. This last documentary brings the history of Southeast Chicago up to the present day. Wetlands to Waste. This is a journey into the environmental history of Southeast Chicago, created from the voices and donated objects of Southeast Chicago residents. You can view this documentary online, or in this case, you can just play it like a video and watch it like you would any other documentary film. After Southeast Chicago steel mills closed in the 1980s and 90s, people thought there would be less environmental pollution. Sometimes, though, it's just the names of the polluters that change. This is a pollutant called pet coke. Community activists donated this jar to the Southeast Chicago Historical Museum to remind themselves of one of the region's most bitter environmental battles. In 2013, Southeast Chicago resident Dave Barboza had to cancel a backyard party after high winds blew sticky black dust around the neighborhood. Residents were unsure where this quote-unquote dust was coming from. They later discovered it was pet coke, blowing off massive uncovered storage piles. Petroleum coke is a dusty industrial waste product that comes from refining Canada's tar sands for oil. Tar sands mining is a form of unconventional oil production that is even more environmentally harmful than conventional production. It has sparked worldwide protests for its environmental impact and role in climate change. And if you want to learn more about the distinction between unconventional and conventional oil and gas, you can click on this on the online version and read more. Some of the Canadian tar sands were being shipped for processing at the Whiting Oil Refinery next door to Southeast Chicago. The pet coke waste was then stored in massive uncovered piles along the Calumet River that had once bustled with steel mills. It was later shipped to other parts of the world to use as a cheap industrial fuel, but one that burns even dirtier than coal. Residents' concerns about pet coke's health effects sparked a battle against powerful polluters and slow-moving city and state officials. The fight was led by neighborhood environmental groups and community leaders. And these are pictures of some of the community activists who were involved. Community groups used all the tools they could muster to document pet coke's effects, including learning to create aerial photos by balloon mapping. In the end, they would defy all odds and win the battle against pet coke polluters. Outdoor storage would be banned, and pet coke polluters were forced to pay damages to residents. One of the community leaders who led the fight was Olga Bautista. She was worried about the next generation, including her daughter, Liberty. A quote from Olga: "Our lived experience is our experience. That's what we bring to the table." And here's a quick couple-minute video that gives you some sense of what pet coke pollutants meant for this region.
So this is a jar of petroleum coke. Petroleum coke is a waste product that comes from refining petroleum. In this case, the BP refinery just on the other side of the border in Indiana. Some years ago, in 2013, there was a big windstorm, and it picked up a lot of the pet coke that was being stored along the Calumet River. It blew across the community. It ruined backyard parties. Little league games were called off because people felt like they were in danger. We just didn't know what it was. When we were trying to figure out how far-reaching the situation was, it was really important that we were able to collect that information. So this is a lot of volunteers, people in the neighborhood, not a lot of money. We don't have a drone or anything like that. We were able to do a balloon mapping project where through Public Lab, we were able to use a big red weather balloon filled with helium attached to a camera, and then we just let this baby go, and it would just take pictures of everything underneath. It was actually the first time that we were able to confirm 100% that pet coke was actually leaving the premises, and it was falling on the frozen river. And these are images that we used when we went to City Council. and we shared with our elected officials.
Our lived experience is our experience. That's what we bring to the table. The difficulty for families who have chronic asthmatic children who are taking days off of work. There's countless stories of people that have all kinds of illnesses, and it's also very difficult because a lot of us depend on the industries that are here. So when someone's livelihood depends on this work and they still decide to fight for something better, I think it says a lot. It's actually, for us, it's more like a matter of life and death. Like, we're trying to live healthy lives for ourselves and for our children.
There's a lot of people that live in this neighborhood. We made sure that we made it very hard to ignore. I feel very proud that we were able to do that. That's one of the reasons why we now have new regulations in the city of Chicago. We want to have the protections that we need, and we also need to repair the harm that's been caused to the community. When it has to do with, these natural resources, a river, a lake, how do we protect that and still be able to have opportunities for employment for our people in our community, especially in areas that have been overburdened like ours, and still be able to sustain life and sustain us.
When the pet coke dust settled, it settled on homes and in human lungs, but it also fell into the Calumet River and surrounding lakes and wetlands. To understand what's at stake in these contemporary environmental struggles in Southeast Chicago, we need to look to the past. That past is bound up with the watery landscape of the Calumet region. This is the chapter Out of the Wetlands. The Calumet area was once the largest wetland complex in the Great Lakes region of the Midwestern United States. Migrating birds and other creatures congregated there. This is a quote from a local resident, Mildred Barney, through an oral history given to the museum. Don't know if people realize how much swampland there was around here. You had your Lake Michigan. You had Lake George. You had Lake Calumet. Lake Calumet came all the way through over Torrance Avenue. There was Hyde Lake. And again, if you go up to the top left and click on these pink buttons, you can find more information about whatever you're seeing, whatever object, photographs, or oral history you're seeing and hearing about. Researchers in the late 1800s and early 1900s saved early plant and animal life from Wolf Lake at the Field Museum. And here you can scroll down and see animal and plant specimens from the late 19th to early 20th century that were then housed at the Field Museum in Chicago. For more information on a particular item, you can click on this and view that specimen in the archive. It was out of these Calumet wetlands that the industry of Southeast Chicago emerged. It would also emerge on the land and waterways of people who already lived there.
This area historically, before all of the settlement, before the mills, was Potawatomi land. So that was the prominent tribe here was Potawatomi. They were forced out after the Chicago treaties and the land was ceded. They were forced. The Prairie Band were moved to Marietta, Kansas, which is where we're from, where my grandmother is from. It was a completely different environment, completely different way of life from living off the lake, living in the woods.
Potawatomi Native Americans once had villages on the land that would become Southeast Chicago. One was located near Wolf Lake, another not far from the mouth of the Calumet River, and a third at Lake Calumet. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 and Chicago Treaty of 1833 forced most Native Americans, including Potawatomi, out of the Calumet region. Some Potawatomi individuals had to sell their land, including the children of Chief Abnawabni, who sold what would later become Ewing Avenue, the main street of the East Side neighborhood. At the same time train tracks were being laid through the Calumet wetlands in the early 1900s, Pokagon and Potawatomi were suing Illinois Steel South Works. They wanted to reclaim the Chicago waterfront that had once been their home. Although the lawsuit failed, some indigenous people managed to retain connections to the Chicago region, even as others were displaced. And here you can, if you click left, you can hear more from Gina Rojas talking about the experience of indigenous populations in the area historically.
Southworks was our next door neighbor, like our literal next door neighbor. It was our house, another house, and then the wall for Southworks. So my dad was Native American and Mexican American. And so his mom was Native American. She's Prairie Band Potawatomi. And she grew up on the reservation. Her sister or her cousin was here in Chicago already. I said, come on over, you'll find a job. You'll get a job very quickly. And so she came to Chicago in the summertime. And if we had any time off or breaks, we'd go to visit my grandma on the reservation. We'd take a road trip. My mom especially would make sure to bring us out there, and we'd go to the powwows or gatherings. My dad worked for the railroad, and so we would see him sometimes on the rail, waving hi to us as we're playing down on the street.
Daddy,
yeah.
Daddy.
Yeah. That was back in the 70s, so there's still big production. We would go and we'd play outside with our friends, and we'd play in the dirt, play in the mud. And I never realized until we moved that dirt was not supposed to be pitch black, and it wasn't supposed to sparkle. We'd play in that, and we'd
You remember that too, when it was all sparkly and
We'd
it would come down, and we'd go, yeah, it's so cute.
We'd wave our hands in there, and then we walk around and our hands would sparkle. One of my fondest memories is when my father would take me to Cal Park to go fishing. He loved outdoors. He really did. He went fishing even without me. He'd always go fishing. And then our neighbor was his grandmother for a while. And his grandmother had a garden and had lots of knowledge about plant medicines and how to heal different teas and different salves and stuff like that. Yeah. And so he would help her with her garden. So I went to school in the 70s, and that was not talked about. In fact, the Native American Religious Freedom Act wasn't until I think it was 1978. So it wasn't talked about at all. People knew that we were Native American, but there wasn't any talk about it. And I remember coming home from school, and my dad would say, "Oh, what did you learn today?" I said, "Oh, I learned about Christopher Columbus." And then he'd sit me down and say, "Okay, now let me tell you the real story." Yeah.
But he was proud of what he was. He was.
And if you click to the right, you can find out about the Newbeezer family, who were an early settler family that came to live along the shores of Wolf Lake in the early 1900s. And you can find out much more about that family as well. In the early 20th century, vast numbers of newcomers were coming to the Calumet region to work in the steel mills. Life was led in growing intimacy with industry. At the turn of the 19th century, these children were photographed playing in Lake Michigan at a spot that would later become Calumet Park. The smoke from the Southworks steel mill can be seen in the distance. The environment was simply part of daily life. Kids at one school could watch fish swimming under their feet through chinks in the floorboards. Others caught frogs and turtles in the wetlands. In the winter, young people skated across the wetlands that connected the entire Calumet region. And here, if you click on this part here, you can hear bits from oral histories of people talking about when they were kids, the early days of Southeast Chicago in the Calumet wetland region. Many who immigrated to the region came from rural farm families. Some had gardens, chickens, and animals. On the east side, the Van Dyson family had a horse named Sam. Some residents still hunted. The lakes and wetlands were also places to relax when people had time. The Southeast Sportsman Club at Wolf Lake would lead some of the earliest conservation efforts in the region beginning in the 1930s. And if you'd like to read more about the Southeast Sportsman Club, you can find more information here. For most people, though, life remained inseparable from industry. It was lived in close proximity to the steel mills and all that industry brought. The next chapter is what industry brought. In the early days, industry was seen as a modern miracle. Residents and visitors shared colored postcards of the wonders of the steel mills. And here there's a carousel of early postcards of the mills. History books describe how the Calumet waterways were used to bring in raw materials and ship out steel and other products. The wetlands also provided a place to dispose of industrial waste. But Southeast Chicago residents had their own experiences of living in this landscape. Here's a quote from Union leader Ed Sedlowski. "When I was a boy, I'd lie on the porch in the summertime, and you could see the sky glow when they pour out of the Bessemer furnaces.
It was one steel mill after another: Southworks, Republic Steel, Wisconsin Steel, Acme Steel. It would glow, literally glow. I'm not kidding you. When I was a boy, I'd lay on the porch in the summertime, and you'd sleep outside, and you could see the sky glow when they pour out of the Bessemers and that, and just the sky would light up and glow in the background and that. And what the hell? There was a whole neighborhood called Slag Valley. This is where they dumped the slag and that,
Slag is a waste byproduct of ore and metal smelting and was skimmed off the top of molten iron. In the days before television, families in Southeast Chicago would watch glowing slag being poured from the mills for entertainment. It was beautiful to watch. Slag also contains heavy metals. Mill wastewater laced with chemicals and acids was disposed of by throwing it on top of burning slag and vaporizing it. The slag became impregnated with more contaminants. Most of the Calumet wetlands were filled in with slag and other waste. And this image shows you some of the different kinds of waste deposits in the Calumet region. Some of the Calumet steel mills and even Calumet Park, where the museum is located, were built on artificial land created from slag in Lake Michigan. And here's a diagram that shows you where Southworks, the old Southworks mill, had been, the amount of land that was built out from slag.
There was a lot of swamps on 110th and Avenue J, and we could pick cattails, and they had, pollywogs and all those interesting little animals, and it was slag because that's where all the steel mills dumped their slag. And what happens to slag is it turns to granite after a certain while, and it had to be jackhammered. When all those new homes went up towards the mall, they had a real hard time making foundations for those homes because of the slag.
One early steel company depicted the potentially dangerous byproducts of steelmaking as part of a tree of life. In fact, in the decades after the Great Depression, people were happy to see smoke coming from the mills. It meant there was food on the table.
All I know is when you seen all the smoke in this area, you knew there was a paycheck on the table every Friday. The kids were eating. The more smoke, the better.
But the steel industry churned out pollutants at every stage of the steelmaking process. Harmful pollutants from the mills made their way into the air, water, and land of Southeast Chicago and the Calumet wetlands.
One of the things that really sets the southeast side apart from other parts of the city is that you had this just truly incredible concentration of industries. When you're burning coal, you have nitric oxide, sulfuric oxide, and there was also quite a bit of particulate matter, as they call it, that went downwind. They would dump acids and processed water that was contaminated right back into the river.
And this is a diagram of the different stages of the steelmaking process. If you hover over different stages of the process, you can find out more information. Also, this button down at the bottom that says Sources PDFs, you can find bibliography for different literature about the health effects of components of the steelmaking process. But as time went on, Southeast Chicago residents grew increasingly frustrated about the pollution. One quote from Frank Corona: "The dust that was in the air affected your lungs."
You're talking about the air polluted, the ground was polluted. The dust that was in the air affected your lungs, the silver. You get your tuberculosis, you get your cancer, you get something in the blood that isn't right, isn't normal.
Pollution is in our DNA. You know, it's right there with the Heine's hot sauce, right? You know, we all have it. EPA came, tested all my land, and I own a lot of land here, okay? And they told me, don't grow no more carrots because you don't know what you're eating.
In the early days of the steel mills, death had often come quickly from mill accidents. But death could also come slowly, from cancers, lung disease, and other illnesses. And even after the steel mills closed, the pollution didn't disappear. This next chapter is called After the Mills Closed. During the 1980s and 90s, the closing of the steel mills brought economic and social devastation to the region. Some hoped the silver lining might be life getting healthier. But would it? Unemployed steelworkers often fished both to pass the time and bring something home to feed their kids. But was the fish okay to eat? In addition to all the industrial waste, the Calumet region was home to other kinds of waste. For decades, the city of Chicago had dumped its municipal garbage in southeast Chicago's wetlands. Waste from other geographic regions also made its way into commercial landfills.
There was a huge municipal landfill in the north end of Lake Calumet. So you had large quantities of municipal refuse finding their way to the lake. Municipal refuse wasn't just old newspapers and old Frankfurters and kitchen waste. All kinds of things got mixed in typically. And we found in doing studies in other states that there was a lot of toxics that found their way into that. So you begin to have what they called midnight dumpers, people who would, for a fee, go collect waste from an industry, bring it in a tanker truck, and then just open the valve and dump the waste out into the wetlands on the southeast side. So there's been a real history of using that area as a dump for the city and for the industries.
The area was filled with landfills, the city trash that the dumpsters picked up all over, and they dumped it on the southeast side of Chicago in all those wetlands. They filled the wetlands up with the trash, which still exists. You see the mounds today. And I remember when the landfills came in, they said well, we're going to just fill them up for 20 years, and then they would be ski slopes and toboggan slopes. And in the community, we have these wonderful parks once they're closed and covered up. Well, that never happened because, they were closed, but they were toxic mountains. I mean, methane gas and everything was coming out of them.
By the 1980s, 90% of the landfills in the city of Chicago were located here. Southeast Chicago had 51 landfills, 423 hazardous waste sites, and what would become a revolving array of Superfund sites. 1/3 of Lake Calumet was filled in with garbage. The Illinois EPA claimed that the Calumet region hosted the largest concentration of waste in North America. Government agencies tried to hold polluters accountable, but some companies tried to abandon polluted properties and let taxpayers clean them up. Even cleaned up properties could only be used for limited purposes. For decades, the waste and pollution had created health concerns for Southeast Chicago residents and for the Calumet's watery landscape and wildlife. Bins at the Southeast Chicago Historical Museum are stuffed with reports that document these effects. In some ways, Southeast Chicago today is cleaner. However, the few new industries proposed for the area are also often polluters. They are drawn to the region because of zoning restrictions. The new companies, however, are different from the steel mills. While one steel mill might have employed tens of thousands of full-time workers, the newer businesses offer only a handful of jobs. KCBX, a polluting pet coke storage facility, employed only 40 people. It's the worst of both worlds. The next chapter is called Fighting for a Different Future. Southeast Chicago community activists have fought against environmental pollution now for decades. The earliest environmental activism in Southeast Chicago formed against the landfills during the 1970s and 80s. Coalitions of community organizations like CURE and the Southeast Environmental Task Force led the way. These coalitions partnered with neighborhood groups along Southeast Chicago's borders, including Altgeld Gardens, a housing development intended for Black World War II veterans on the other side of the Hegwisch landfills. While changing eligibility requirements forced many black steelworkers out of public housing, remaining Altgeld Gardens residents suffered inside a toxic donut created by industry, landfills, a historic sewage farm, and toxic Chicago Housing Authority building materials.
Hazel Johnson, you live in Altgeld Gardens in the middle of all of the expressways and chemical plants and sludge drying beds. Could you tell us, for those of us who don't come into your neighborhood, what is it like, what does it smell like, and what is it like to live there on a day-to-day basis?
It's like living in hell because of the odor that makes you sick all the time. And it's sickening to know that the people in our area is an isolated area, is a forgotten area that no one cares about. We have infants that's born with deformities. We have a lot of respiratory problems. We have cancer. We have people that have to live on oxygen tanks in their home.
Do you believe that that is related to the pollution?
Sure, I do. We have a lot of people that has to be on a machine because of kidney problem, and we have a lady right back here in the audience that has to go 3 times a week to be on a machine.
May I ask you what you think needs to be done in order to deal with this problem then? Do you want to shut down all the industry around here? Do you want to move people out? What do you want to do?
Close all the industry down and relocate the people. I've been asking that for years.
You want to close all the industry?
Sure I do. Human health come first.
What do people...
You know, that's the problem with the industries, the politicians, and everybody else that care about the bucks. But what is happening to people's health?
But people have to eat. Don't they need jobs?
Sure. Well, let's put that in an area where no one lives, in a non-residential area. And it's still piling all this around us. We are like sitting in a center of a donut. We have steel mill, treatment plants, hazardous waste, incinerators, paint factory. We have it all. And I don't think that in my community should share the burden for the whole city of Chicago, and we've been doing it ever since 1863.
So you
now
say you either move the people... Yeah.
Other environmental groups also emerged in unexpected ways. A proposed airport would launch a new wave of activism. In 1990, Major Richie Daley proposed knocking down Southeast Chicago neighborhoods and filling in wetlands for a third airport for the city. Angry residents protested. Their homes were all they had left. Saving the wetlands became a way to argue against the airport and to save their houses. Again, residents won the battle, and the airport was never built. The struggle would give residents a new appreciation for the Calumet's environment. Community activists began calling for more green spaces and a positive vision for the Calumet's future. They proposed a national heritage area that would honor both the wetlands and residents' industrial past, and clean up the area so their kids and grandkids would want to stay.
There was a meeting at Mann Park Dr. Landing, he had a conceptual plan for a Lake Calumet ecological park. He showed a slideshow of what Lake Calumet looked like many years before and how it had been filled in. And he said that the birds were even coming back to the area, that the Calumet area was full of wetlands, and many of the birds seek out the wetlands. I was really surprised, and I thought, this is a very good idea. Let's make this area, the natural areas, a park area. It's clearing up already. The steel mills are going down. Maybe the people would like to stay in this area instead of going way out somewhere else and enjoy nature. They could enjoy nature right here. We formed a group to support Dr. Landing's conceptual plan, and we called it the Calumet Ecological Park Association.
While the fight for a heritage area is ongoing, pieces of the green space vision are being put into place. And for more information about the green space plans, you can read more here. The struggles over the environment also continue. In the 2010s, the fight against pet coke pollution ushered in a new round of environmental activism. It was a David and Goliath struggle that attracted widespread media attention. KCBX, the main pet coke storage facility, was owned by the Koch brothers, billionaires who spent millions funding climate change denial and opposition to unions and workers' rights. Remarkably, Southeast Chicago activists and an environmental group won a class action lawsuit against Koch Industries and others. Like the fight against the landfills, they put the Calumet region on the map of environmental justice activism in the United States. But an even bigger fight would erupt in 2022. High school students led the fight against General Iron, a polluting facility the city wanted to relocate from the largely white and wealthy North Side to an empty steel mill property across the street from their school. The young people argued it was environmental racism in what was now largely a Latinx community. Some adults even went on hunger strikes. And here you can hear part of an interview with one of the hunger strikers from Southeast Chicago, Jade Mason. Although community environmental activists won the battle, the fights against pet coke and General Iron are just two in a long line of seemingly endless struggles. And this map shows some of the key environmental controversies in the history of Southeast Chicago and the Calumet region over the last couple decades. So you can click on these various spots and find out more information in a picture for the various controversies. Struggles for the future have been equally wide-ranging. Community activists are still fighting so the wetlands that the Pokagon Potawatomi knew so well can survive. They are also fighting for green jobs, since Southeast Chicago residents know better than most that everyone needs both healthy environments and decent jobs. In fact, our future depends on it. And to learn more about green manufacturing initiatives, you can find out more information here, including efforts to create green steel. Museum volunteers and others fought for the creation of Steelworkers Park on the old U.S. Steel Southworks site. Along with all those who donated objects and stories, they struggled to make sure the history of the region is remembered.
Back in the day, we used to call them the black and the white mothers of environmental justice, and because they both was real fierce at what they believe in and what they have changed. And that's Hazel Johnson, who is my mom, and Marion Burns, who worked side by side back in the 80s to fight for industrial cleanup in this area.
Human health come first.
What do people...
that's the problem with the industries, the politicians, and everybody else that care about the bucks. But what is happening to people's health?
No, when we plan where we want to go in the future, we deserve to do that with full knowledge of the past. the negative as well as the positive. How else can we reasonably plan?
These huge steel mills that once employed thousands upon thousands of people are no longer in existence. There's a vacuum since they've left.
I knew the mills were gone. I knew the industry was gone, and I thought this was an opportunity for the community to make a complete turnaround and become something different. And I didn't see that happening. And so I thought, well, let me get involved and see what kind of influence I can have.
I felt, why let a city of Chicago or any other agency tell us what we're going to do with our land, with our homes? Why not make our own plans?
We refused to live next door to a metal scrapyard. The Southeast side took a stand and said, this is a fight that we're not going to give up on. This is something that our community needs to stay on top of, because we got rid of one polluter and another one think it's okay to just come right back into our community. Us as youth, we couldn't let that happen.
It really is hard to see how contaminated it is and how much our community struggles. But I think that through the movement, we've kind of learned to see the beauty. Continuing with what we've learned is showing other youth that the Southeast side is beautiful and we love each other. That's the biggest takeaway that I think I've learned through the movement.
I come out for serenity, peace of mind. That's basically what I come out. I get in my waders and walk in the backside, and I don't think about nothing. And then when I leave here, I go home. It's like anything was bothering my mind is clear. Down south, we got an old saying. If you got a lot of troubles and you got a lot of bills and problems, go to the water, take it to the water. And one thing about the water hypnotize you.
It's still a struggle today in the city of Chicago to achieve environmental justice for all our communities. So we're gonna continue to fight, and thank you for inviting me.
Residents know, however, that the region's future is not only defined by them, but also by those from beyond their borders. Throughout Southeast Chicago's history, distant planners have offered competing visions, for better or worse, of what they thought Southeast Chicago should become. And here on this carousel, you can get some sense of the different competing historical urban planning visions for the Calumet region and Southeast Chicago in particular. The question remains for all those in Southeast Chicago and beyond: what comes next? Can learning about the past help us re-envision what we want our collective futures to be? What future do you see for Southeast Chicago? And this is the end of this documentary. Thank you for joining us for it. There are 3 others that you can find on the website, one on the closing of the steel mills and the impact it had on people in the area, one on Mexican-American journeys, so a history of immigration through the experience of Mexican-Americans in Southeast Chicago. And there's another documentary on the Memorial Day Massacre, a labor event that happened in 1937.